At a weekend dinner table in front of 6 of his friends and a phone live streaming, my son, the boy I raised with the same hands that hauled trash for 32 years, raised his hand and slapped me like I was the trash itself. 20 times. 20 sharp cracks echoed through the living room of the house under my name, each one met with laughter and with his wife lifting her phone closer, saying only one thing: record that. If you've ever been torn down by the very person you raised in front of a crowd, I know exactly how cold that moment feels. And if you want to see what happens when a quiet father finally decides to clean up his life, the way he cleaned up a city for decades, then stay. Leave AOS, if you know that feeling. And if you want to follow stories where justice doesn't need to scream to make the guilty bow their heads, hit subscribe, so stories like this find you when you need them. Thank you for being here with me. For 10 days before that dinner, a burnt smell lingered between, and Darren, the smell of something that had been smoldering for years, only to flare up and surprise everyone who hadn't been paying attention. There was nothing sudden about it. It started with something small. I reminded him to pay the electric bill on time because it was still under my name. He snapped, "Dad, stop interfering. I can handle my own house." I stayed quiet. Then I rolled his trash bin in on Tuesday morning like I always did when passing North Eldon. He got irritated again. "Dad, don't make the neighbors think this house still leans on you." I stayed quiet. And on the 8th day, when I texted that I'd stop by to return the drill he borrowed, he sent a message I never thought I'd hear from my own blood. "Don't come. This house doesn't need your trash smell." I read that text in the locker room at the Flagstaff Environmental Station. My reflective vest was still damp on the shoulder from a light morning rain. I stood still for a few seconds but didn't reply. Some battles are won simply by never entering them. But that night, when he texted again, "We're doing BBQ tonight. Come if you want. Earlier is fine," I knew it was the last chance for a normal meal between us, or the moment everything finally shattered. When I stepped into his backyard, 6 of Darren's friends were already seated. EDM pulsed against the walls. Smoke rose from the grill and beer caps clicked open. The string lights reflected off my reflective vest. I hadn't even taken it off yet, making me stand out in a way I didn't want. Brianna was live streaming on a small tripod. When the camera caught sight of me, she smirked. "Did you come straight from the dump?" Laughter burst out like a reflex. Darren didn't look up right away. He was telling his friends about upgrading his car soon, eyeing a bigger house, things I knew relied mostly on credit and on my name. When he finally saw me, his face tightened as if my presence disrupted the aesthetic of his party. "Dad, you're here." His voice wasn't warm or cold, just empty. I set the potato salad container on the counter and took the last seat at the dim end of the table. I didn't want to intrude on their young laughter, didn't want to be background noise for Brianna's camera. The first few minutes were calm. I didn't touch the plate of ribs in front of me, but then a small comment shifted the entire room. "Brianna, who's that? Your father-in-law?" "Yeah, works for the city. Trash guy." More laughter. Darren laughed too. I said one quiet line, hoping it would cool everything down. "I just want a peaceful dinner." But those words became the final piece of wood tossed into the fire. Darren slammed his beer bottle on the table. "Peaceful? You know why you don't get us? Because your whole life is trash. You don't know what living well is." The table fell silent for half a second before it exploded with laughter. I looked at him for a long moment. I wasn't angry, just tired. I tried to speak, but he stood, leaned in close, the smell of beer thick on his breath. Some moments need only a spark to unleash everything buried inside, and Darren had reached that edge. He leaned in, voice cutting into the last bit of dignity I held. "You know why you've been a loser your whole life? Because you haul garbage. A pathetic, filthy job no one wants to look at. Look at yourself. Do you think you even belong here?" I met his eyes. "That job you despise raised you, paid for your school, paid for the roof over your head. That job never once made me ashamed. I paused, then said each word clearly. Only the way some people live has ever shamed me. It struck straight at his pride. Darren's eyes bulged, neck veins tightening like piano wires. Say that again? Say it again? I didn't change my tone, didn't move. I have never been ashamed of my work. And in that instant, the first slap landed fast as the slam of a sanitation truck door at dawn. Sharp, clean, unexpected. A hard crack snapped across the yard. Someone whispered, "Holy!" He slapped him. Then laughter erupted. Brianna zoomed in with her phone. Wait, everyone watch this." The second slap hit without hesitation. The fifth, he hissed through his teeth. "Trash man." The music, the laughter, the beer smell, the smoke, everything spun around me. The 12th slap dragged me back into a memory. Darren at 12 in the passenger seat of my truck, grinning as I let him pull the lift lever. He said, "I don't want to work hard like you when I grow up." I said, "Just be kind. That's all that matters." I opened my eyes just as the 13th slap struck. 14, 15. The world blurred. Tears welled, but I refused to let them fall. 16, 17, 18, 19. His hand reddened. His breathing sharpened, but he still wanted the full performance. The 20th slap, the final one. Not the hardest, but the clearest. Brianna clapped like she'd finished watching a show. "Record that." I placed my hands on the table, pushed my chair back, and stood. The Flagstaff night wind shook the string lights above us. I looked at my son, his face flushed with beer, with arrogance, with the kind of confidence he believed he had earned. I asked, calm enough that even I didn't recognize my own voice, "Are you done?" Silence. I nodded. "If you're done, I'm going home." And I walked away. No one called after me. No apology was spoken. No hand reached out to steady me. Only soft laughter, whispers, and the smell of trash from my reflective vest. A smell that for the first time in 32 years on the job didn't make me ashamed. It woke me up. Because some things, if no one else will clean them up, it's time to clean them yourself. I woke up at 4:08, 3 minutes later than usual, something that hadn't happened once in 32 years. When I washed my face, the cold water hitting my swollen cheek was a reminder that last night had not been a nightmare. I put on my green reflective vest, still carrying a faint brown smear on the left shoulder, a smear I knew damn well wasn't from trash. The road to the Flagstaff Environmental Services Station was quieter than usual that morning. When I pushed the door open, the smell of engine oil and the crackle of truck ignitions sounded like every other day, but the air was different. 3 co-workers standing by the coffee machine fell silent. They looked at me, not curious, but with the sidelong glance of people who think they're witnessing something they shouldn't. I nodded at them. They nodded back, quick and stiff. No one asked, "You okay?" No one said, "What happened?" Just avoidance, loud enough to make the oil-soaked room feel suffocating. I climbed into the cab of the familiar North Eldon route truck. When I sat in the driver's seat, the seatbelt pressed right against the bruised part of my cheek. Sharp, but not enough to make me flinch. Physical pain is always kinder than the kind people deal out. When I switched on the internal radio to check the channel, Joe, the 26-year-old rookie, came through. "Frank, did you see the clip yet?" I didn't answer. Joe went silent immediately. Maybe he realized the question answered itself. I drove up the Canyon Terrace incline, still covered in mist like thin smoke. On the sidewalk, 2 kids from Whispering Pines were biking to school. They stopped when they saw the sanitation truck roll by. One lifted his hand to cover his mouth. The other said loud enough for me to hear through the glass, "Trash, Grandpa!" I didn't turn my head, but my chest tightened for a beat. Kids don't invent things like that. They heard it somewhere, probably from a parent's phone, probably from the thing I was about to see myself. Halfway through the route, I pulled over by the clearing near the pines and checked my phone. A message from Marcus. Frank, the clip is going viral in the local groups. Brace yourself. I opened the link. 4 seconds. A chopped piece of Brianna's live stream. The shaky angle, string lights behind me, her shrill laugh, and the sound, smack, cracking through the night. The caption rolling under it. Old man slapped by his own son, Chajigiri, family drama. Flagstaff night. My heart didn't beat any faster. You don't die of shock when you've lived a lifetime inside other people's contempt. I shut off the phone and sat there for a full minute. Cold wind seeped through the door seals, carrying the faint smell of plastic and pine, Flagstaff's signature. I touched my chest, right over the dried streak of blood from last night. It had hardened into a tiny rough patch, scraping my skin whenever I moved. Then I put the truck back, in drive. Trash routes don't wait for feelings. At noon, I stopped by the Flagstaff Farmers Market to buy a few apples, the habit I've kept since my wife passed. The vendor I'd known for 8 years still smiled at me, but the customer beside her froze. A younger woman whispered to her friend, not even bothering to hide it. "Oh my God, is that him? The one whose son slapped him?" I pretended not to hear, but the words hooked into me anyway. In the afternoon, I returned to my small South Switzer Canyon house. Before showering, I checked my indoor cameras, the system I installed years ago just to keep an eye on the place during late shifts, never expecting tonight's reason. On the grainy screen, I saw Darren and Brianna on my couch. The TV was playing YouTube. They were watching the same 4-second clip. Brianna was doubled over, laughing like it was cheap comedy. Darren wasn't laughing. He leaned back, hand pinching the bridge of his nose, but not from guilt. More like the smug embarrassment of someone convinced the storm would blow over. I watched them a few seconds longer, then shut the feed. Not because it hurt, but because it was clear they didn't see me as a person anymore. That night, I opened the closet and took out my old leather sanitation gloves, the ones I'd used for over a decade. When I set my palm on them, I realized my hand was trembling, not from fear, not from pain, from something else. Resolve. A cold, steady resolve slipping into my bloodstream, like Flagstaff night frost, sinking into bone. I knew exactly what I needed to do, and I knew that starting tomorrow, my silence would no longer be surrender. It would be the beginning of a silent storm, one Darren was nowhere near smart enough to see coming. The meaning of last night wasn't the slap. It was that the whole neighborhood, the whole little corner of social media, even kids I'd never met, had all witnessed my humiliation together. And that public witnessing was the final kick. A father needs to stand up. I sat for a long time in front of the gray metal cabinet at the back of the garage, the cabinet I bought from a salvage yard in 1998, repainted myself, replaced the hinges myself, and used to store everything important that no one wants to look at. Rusty pliers, zip ties, torn gloves, and the papers my life moved along with. Tonight, that metal cabinet felt like it was staring back at me. I opened it. The smell of old steel and the rubber of broken sanitation gloves split into the air in a way my hands knew by heart. On the third shelf, between a box of brown rusted nails, lay an old Ziploc bag, its edges slightly yellowed, with my handwriting from over a decade ago on the front. House, mortgage, 2012. I pulled the bag out. That crinkling sound brought back more than paperwork. It brought back cold dawns from my younger years, dragging 70-pound trash bins through rain-slick streets while trying to keep an entire city on schedule. I opened the bag. Inside was my whole middle age, the loan contract, verification papers, interest sheets, and property tax receipts. And in the center, the title. Thin paper, edges slightly curled, but the black letters are still intact. One name only, Franklin McKay. No Darren, no Brianna, no one else. I braced a hand on the cabinet, the cold metal seeping into my palm. I remembered the day I signed that mortgage in 2012. Silver Peak Credit Union flipped through every page, questioning every line of my pay history. The manager, Marissa, said plainly, "If you hadn't worked 32 years at Flagstaff Environmental Services with perfect attendance, we wouldn't approve this." I remember that sentence as clearly as the sound of a garbage truck starting at dawn. I was the one who opened the door to the house Darren now lives in. The job he mocks is the reason the bank stamped approval. The hand inside a rubber glove is the hand that signed ownership. I lifted the title. The paper trembled, not because I was shaking, but because my palm had gone cold ever since I read that caption. Old man slapped by his own son. The next morning, I took the documents to Attorney Cranford's office. He'd been my friend for 15 years, the one who helped me write my will after my wife passed. His office sat on the second floor of a red brick building near Route 66, with an old wooden sign that looked worn but honest. He pushed his glasses up the bridge of his nose and reviewed every page carefully. Didn't ask about the 20 slaps. Didn't ask why I dug the files out. Just did what the law required. Finally, he set his pen down, tapped the title, and said in a voice solid as stone, "You're the sole owner. They're occupants. Nothing more. No ownership rights." I nodded. It was only the truth, confirmed by someone who knew the law better than I did. Cranford looked at me a moment longer, as if he wanted to ask something, but instead he simply said, "If anything happens, I'll stand with you." I said only, "Thank you." On the drive home, Flagstaff's light rain fell onto the windshield like dust from old memories. Passing through South Eldon, I saw a family dragging their trash bin to the curb. The man lifted the heavy blue can slightly, his face tightening. It reminded me of storm season mornings, days I pulled 2, 3 full bins weighing down my arms, water running off the lids into my rubber boots like ice. Meanwhile, Darren had been a freshman in high school, sleeping until 10, never knowing what I'd done before he opened his eyes. I didn't blame him. I just realized some children never understand that stability isn't accidental. It is earned with sore backs, worn shoulders, and trash routes at 4 a.m. That night, I put the documents back into the Ziploc bag and set it on the top shelf of the metal cabinet. This time, I locked it with a small black padlock, a lock I hadn't used in years. In the cold garage, the dim neon light fell across the paper in my hand. I rested my palm against my reflective vest, drying on the chair, right over the spot with dried blood. My hand shook slightly, not from weakness, not from fear, but because I understood after this moment nothing was about feelings anymore. It was about the law, about truth, about ownership I had forgotten for a decade. And that truth, passing through a humiliated father, becomes the sharpest blade. I shut the cabinet. The padlock clicked, small but loud as destiny knocking. I knew the 20 slaps weren't the end. They were only the beginning. After that meeting with Attorney Cranford, I drove back up the rain-soaked slope near South Switzer Canyon and stopped right at the front porch, where Brianna's row of fern pots sat still like things she bought for looks and then abandoned. I had been the one watering them every day, and when I reached into the pocket of my reflective vest for the old house key, I remembered a simple truth. I am the homeowner. I still have the keys, and I am responsible for maintaining my own property. I watered the plants, checked the electrical panel, checked the back door lock, then opened the indoor camera app to adjust the viewing angle. Legal, lawful, because my name is the only one on the title. As I was locking the door again, Darren didn't bother looking at me. He just jerked his chin, giving orders the way you talk to hired help. "Dad, take care of the plants and check the house for us. We'll be gone a few days." Brianna stood behind him, arms crossed, her lips curved with meaning. "Make sure my plants don't die. I don't want to come home to a mess." No please, no asking, just demands, cold, clipped, dripping with contempt. Then they stepped back inside, dragging 2 Samsonite suitcases that scraped across the tile, the wheels hitting the floor like brick edges, grinding across my pride. Darren glanced at me one last time The kind of glance from someone who thinks everything in the house belongs to him. "Lock it up for us, yeah? We're late." They walked straight to the car and slammed the door shut without a backward look. The SUV started and backed down the driveway. Brianna stuck her hand out the window and waved, smug, "Bye, don't mess up the house." The car shot down the South Switzer Canyon slope, leaving me standing on the porch, my hand still holding the key to the house I legally own, while they treated me like unpaid maintenance. When they left, before the engine noise disappeared into traffic on the I-17 toward Phoenix Airport, I knew this would be the last time I watered things that weren't mine, and the first time I knew I had to reclaim what was supposed to be mine. From the moment the SUV disappeared behind the pine line, I began the 3 things the law allows me to do: contacting Megan Greeley, the realtor for this area, and when she saw the title with only my name, she said immediately, "We can proceed right away," booking Hendricks Movers for Tuesday at 8 a.m., with the instruction not to notify anyone, and Mr. Hendricks simply said, "I understand," then calling attorney Cranford to prepare the closing paperwork, all of which could be completed in 3 to 4 days, perfectly matching their 5-day trip to Cancun. I adjusted every indoor camera angle with the full legal authority of the homeowner, then left Flagstaff and drove to the small wooden cabin near Walnut Canyon, 17 minutes away. Inside the cabin, I set my phone on the table and opened the camera. The living room appeared clearly. The sofa set, the wooden table, the rug, the kitchen where they once laughed at me. In the cold blue glow of the screen, I exhaled slowly. They went for the sun and cocktails, and I, in the silence of a cabin in the woods, began setting the stage for justice. Only 5 days, exactly 5 days, to take back what they believed was theirs. I arrived at Megan Greeley's office at 7:15 a.m., still wearing the reflective vest that carried the smell of my overnight shift. This wasn't the first time I'd contacted her. I had emailed her the entire house file the day before. But it was the first time I walked in with a resolve so clear that even I could feel how cold it sat in my chest. Her office was on the 2nd floor of a red brick building on Route 66, the glass door still fogged with morning moisture, the coffee machine humming. Megan pulled out a chair for me, her eyes pausing for a beat on the fading bruise on my cheekbone, but she didn't ask. She simply set both hands on the desk and asked the one question I knew she was obligated to ask. "How fast do you want this sold, Mr. Frank?" I answered straight. "No detours. Fast, before they get back from Cancun." Megan nodded instantly, not even pretending to be surprised. She opened her laptop and turned the screen toward me. The entire listing package had already been prepared the night before. Listing agreement, disclosures, the projected schedule, and a document she called Fast Route Closing, an accelerated track for homes with clean paperwork. And my paperwork was cleaner than anything she had ever processed. The title carried only my name, property taxes paid on time for 10 years, no disputes, no liens, no legal notes. She spoke quietly, but with the certainty of someone who had done this a long time. "With a file like this, we can sell in 2 days, if you sign right now." I nodded. She slid the pen toward me. My hand, the same hand that had hauled 70-pound trash bins across ice and storm, shook slightly as I picked up the pen, but it wasn't the shake of hesitation. It was the shock of knowing that every stroke I was about to write would compress the humiliation of the night Darren slapped me 20 times into one silent command. I signed the first box. The ink sank into the paper like the sound of a garbage truck, door slamming shut every morning, sharp, clean, decisive. I signed the second box, the third. By the 6th packet, my hand had stopped shaking. By the 10th, I felt myself tightening the part of my life I had allowed my son to step on, without mercy. By the 20th, Megan immediately uploaded the file into the MLS and activated the priority push, a feature she explained as sending the property straight to buyers waiting to strike fast. 5 minutes later, Megan's computer chimed. A young buyer, paying cash, she said they were a tech couple moving up from Phoenix, sent an offer for $426,000, closing within 48 hours, as is. No repairs, no negotiating. Megan looked at me, eyes widening like even she didn't expect it to hit this fast. They want it now. This is a solid offer. If you approve, we can lock it in this morning. I didn't hesitate. Do it. Megan sent the contract instantly, opened a three-way line with the title company, and set the signing schedule. Everything moved so fast it reminded me of the garbage truck barreling down Eldon Slope every morning, unstoppable. Mr. Frank, Megan said softly as she printed the final packet, from this moment on, this house is in the closing pipeline. Those two have no authority to stop it. I stood, straightened the collar of my reflective vest, and looked out the window where the Flagstaff morning light hit the street. I knew that right at this hour, Darren was drinking cocktails in Cancun, posting ridiculous captions about living better than all of you, while I, in the uniform he once called the smell of trash, had just signed the papers that would take back the ground he stood on. Megan texted me the confirmation. Mr. Frank, the buyers have wired the earnest money, closing in 48 hours. I stepped out of the office at 8 o'clock a.m. The Flagstaff air was cold, but it felt clean. This wasn't just a morning of signatures. This was the morning the wheels of my justice began to roll. Quiet, steady, powered by paperwork, ink, and a speed my son never imagined. He slapped me 20 times in front of his friends, and I, after just 14 signatures, took back everything he thought would be his forever. At 8 a.m. sharp, the white Hendrix Movers truck pulled up in front of the driveway. I wasn't there. I was sitting inside the Walnut Canyon cabin, laptop open, connected to the indoor cameras to watch every movement inside the house that had once been my home. When the movers opened the front door, the morning light spilled in, slicing across the living room like a blade, stripping everything bare. Through the screen, I watched them begin removing the dining table legs, each twist of a screw sounding like a cold click. Another opened the hallway closet, dragging out carton boxes Brianna had stuffed with meaningless things. A third gathered kitchen items, wrapped blankets, rolled up frames, working clean and fast as if they were clearing an abandoned property, not the place where the two people who slapped me and called me a trash man lived. 8:27, a carton box lost its balance and fell to the floor with a dull thump that echoed through my laptop speakers. The camera shook. The box split open. Among the scattered mess was one small item that rolled to the table leg, a red toy car, its rubber wheels chipped, its body carrying the dust of childhood. My chest tightened for a beat. I remembered the day I picked it up. Darren was 6. I was on the North Eldon trash route and saw it lying beside someone's bin. I brought it home, rinsed it under the hose, and that day he ran around the yard like he was holding the whole world. That car now lay abandoned on the bare floor, like a piece of memory its owner had thrown away from his own life. I touched the edge of the screen lightly, then looked away, not out of weakness, but because some good memories can hurt like hell when set next to the reality unfolding. Wind slipped through the cabin cracks, making the wooden walls tremble. My phone buzzed, an Instagram notification. Brianna had posted a photo from Cancun, bikini, gold sunlight, a neon cocktail, blue ocean behind her like a fake backdrop. The caption appeared sharp, each word pressed into me like a thumb pushing hard. Sunshine, cocktails, no losers today. Trashy people, the way she talked about the man who raised her husband for more than 20 years. The way she talked about the man her husband slapped 20 times in the house, now being stripped bare by movers. In Cancun, they thought that was happiness. In Flagstaff, the truth was more naked than the floor once the furniture was gone. The movers kept going, cabinets emptied, shelves cleared. Bright patches of wood floor appeared like parts of the house that had never seen daylight. The house slowly returned to its real, legal identity. Mine, and only mine. 9:05. The first truckload pulled out of the driveway. This was the moment I'd been waiting for. I called locksmith Porter, the old locksmith from South Switzer. Just 12 minutes later, the front door camera showed him. Silver hair, tool case, slow but steady steps. He bent over the old lock Darren still believed belonged to him. I heard the sound of steel tools striking metal through the camera mic, the crisp clack as the old core was pulled out, then the steady turn of screws as he installed a brand new Yale. Porter tested the door 3 times. Each shut landed with a dry, final thud, like a period hammered at the end of a rotten chapter. He looked around, saw no one was inside, then leaned close to the camera and said quietly, as if he knew I was watching, "New lock's in. Only the homeowner opens this now. Anyone else, they can forget it." I nodded even though he couldn't see me. In the moment the old lock dropped into Porter's palm, I felt like the entire house finally exhaled after years of being treated like shared property by people who never paid a single dime of the mortgage. When Porter left the driveway, the movers returned with the second load, clearing out the rest. On my laptop screen, I zoomed in on the living room. The rug rolled up, the sofa carried out, the frames unmounted, the wooden tabletop leaning against the wall, like the last witness waiting to be removed. The house was so silent and hollow, I could hear the tiny click of my mouse as I closed the camera app. In Cancun, Darren and Brianna believed today was the best day of their vacation. But in Flagstaff, I knew exactly what was happening. This was the first day their perfect life began to be dismantled, piece by piece, shelf by shelf, lock by lock, right in front of me, while they remained completely unaware. That afternoon in Flagstaff was strangely clear, as if the sky itself wanted to witness me signing off on an old chapter. I stood at the front door at 3:18 p.m., exactly on time for the buyers. A young couple from Phoenix, holding their closing papers, stepped out of a silver Subaru. When we shook hands, they looked around the almost empty house, their eyes carrying a mix of regret and the quiet excitement of people about to start something new. The husband, Jacob, looked at me and said a sentence I knew I would never forget in all my 32 years of sanitation work. "We'll keep this house cleaner than it has ever been with them. Cleaner than they ever kept it." That line cut into me like a blade honed too finely, because clean was what I had spent 32 years protecting every day, from filthy alleys to the very roof Darren believed belonged to him. A stranger, barely inside the door, had already seen what my own son refused to, how badly this house had been treated. I didn't answer, I only nodded, so slightly Jacob might not have realized I was steadying my breath. After handing over the new keys, the set Porter installed this morning, I walked through the house one last time, slow as if every step was filing another memory into its final drawer. I touched the wooden frame by the living room, the one I had painted myself in the summer of 2014 after a long shift. The paint was still there, a little rough because I rushed in the 40-degree heat, but that roughness always reminded me that a home doesn't need to be perfect, it just needs to be honest. My hand slid down the wall where Darren's graduation photo once hung, the same spot he slammed a fist against years later during a fight with Brianna. I glanced toward the kitchen where I once placed a small desk lamp so Darren could do his homework in middle school. Everything still stood in place, only the meaning of it all had changed ownership. I stepped out to the backyard where the Flagstaff wind pushed through the pine-scented fence. Mr. Hughes, the elderly neighbor who'd lived beside me for nearly 2 decades, was leaning on the gate, hands in the pockets of his brown coat, his eyes holding something both sad and knowing. He shook his head softly, then spoke slowly, each word measured as if the wind might take it away. "Frank, you did the right thing. Not, it'll be okay, not, time heals, but you did the right thing. the sentence I needed to hear but never dared say to myself. I could only answer one simple line. I've had enough. Mr. Hughes nodded, placed a firm, warm hand on my shoulder, then headed back inside. I stayed a few more seconds, looking at the house one last time as the sunset washed a thin gold layer over the exterior walls. No furniture, no laughter, no slaps. Just emptiness and relief. As I walked away, the door shut behind me with the crisp sound of the new lock. A clean, cold, orderly click. The sound of a past closing and of something I had quietly built, while my son was drinking cocktails in Cancun. Silent justice. Peak one of my life. I left the property that evening with only one feeling. I didn't need to be there when the truth finally came knocking for them. I only needed to let everything run its course. And 2 days later, when the Flagstaff night dropped its first winter chill, it was the porch camera, the device I installed years ago and the buyers hadn't reset yet, that became the window through which I witnessed what every slap had promised long ago. At 10:23 p.m., with Flagstaff's temperature dropping to 10 degrees and the plateau wind slicing through the pines out front, I sat in the Walnut Canyon cabin, laptop open, zooming the outdoor camera to its fullest. Their day rental SUV screeched to a stop in front of the house, its headlights dragging a long beam across a wall that now belonged to someone else. What happened next looked like a cheap comedy they didn't know they were starring in. The camera caught everything. Brianna yanking a fake LV suitcase, the zipper clacking, her hair still wet with beach oil, mumbling something irritated under her breath. Darren was different. He stepped out like a man who'd had 5 straight days of Cancun cocktails, humming some tune about living better, his floral shirt unbuttoned down 3 buttons, as if he were walking into a private villa. They had no idea the house had changed owners 48 hours ago. Darren shoved the key into the lock once. No click. He tried harder. Still nothing. His face tightened, the alcohol still on his breath. He looked at the key, then the lock, muttering, "What the hell? Who changed the lock?" Brianna snapped instantly, slammed the suitcase against the door. "Hey! Open! What is this joke? Open the damn door!" Her shrill voice echoed across the yard, carrying all the way to Mr. Hughes's house next door. But the door stayed still, and this was the best moment, one of those once-in-a-lifetime moments for a father. The door opened slightly from the inside, and the buyer stepped out, holding a mug of hot tea, his expression calm enough to make the night pause. He spoke slowly, clearly, softly, the kind of soft that sends a cold line down your spine. "This is our home. You need to leave." The camera captured every millisecond, Darren's face freezing, the drunken grin evaporating, the alcohol burning clean out of him. Brianna went still, lips twitching, eyes wide. In that brief moment, they both turned into statues, pale from forehead to collarbone, bloodless. Darren stammered, "Home? This is my house." The buyer simply held out the closing document through the cracked door, the porch light catching the green seal of the Flagstaff title office. Nothing else needed saying. No one had to explain anything. On my laptop screen, I watched it, the way you watch rain fall on a place you once stood. Not happy, not triumphant, just with a strange feeling. Justice, when it arrives on time, isn't loud. It drops hard and steals the air from the room like an invisible slap. Darren touched the paper like touching a verdict he wrote himself. Brianna stepped back, the LV suitcase tilting, its wheel hitting the ground with a weak clack. The buyer added one more line, simple and sharper than a box cutter blade. "We live here now. You're trespassing." And I sat there, in the small cabin, my hand resting on my old reflective vest, feeling my chest finally release a breath I'd been holding since the night I was slapped. I didn't need to say a word, didn't need to prove anything. The truth stood in front of them in the form of a locked door, a new lock, and a homeowner who didn't know me but spoke every word on my behalf. I sat in the Walnut Canyon cabin, laptop glowing in the kind of silence that feels carved out of the dark, and the moment the buyers shut the door in their faces, the front yard instantly turned into a chaos stage no director could ever choreograph. The porch cam shook slightly as Darren lunged at the door, shoulders slamming into the wood like a madman, screaming, "Where are our things? Where is everything?" His voice cracked open in the night, bounced off Mr. Hughes's wall, and snapped back sharp as bent aluminum. The buyer opened the door just wide enough to slip the closing document through, the porch light catching the green seal, cold and final. Jacob spoke calmly, like he was explaining the weather to a passerby. "Everything you're asking for was removed legally. This house isn't yours." Darren snatched the paper, eyes darting from the words, "Grant deed recorded down to the signatures," and I saw, crystal clear, the instant he realized there wasn't a single crack left for him to crawl through. Brianna couldn't even stay on her feet. She collapsed right on the doorstep, her knees hitting concrete with a dull crack, her hands shaking uncontrollably. Her mascara streamed in 2 black tracks, like someone smeared soot down her cheeks. She kept repeating, "No, no, no. Someone fix this. Someone fix this," as if she was talking to a god, not to the legal system of the state of Arizona. And then the peak of humiliation arrived, not from me, but from the Whispering Pines neighborhood that once whispered about me for years. The house across the street flipped on its porch light, and Ms. Linda stood behind her fence, half her body leaning out, phone pointed directly at them. Right behind her was Connor, the neighborhood kid, live streaming to the Facebook neighborhood group with the caption, "They lost the house while vacationing." 10 minutes later, the clip hit 300 views. An hour later, 2,000. By the next morning, more than 12,000. I scrolled through the first comments, popping up under the clip, each one a nail hammered into the coffin of whatever dignity Darren thought would last. "Karma hits hard. Never slap your dad. They deserved it." And then the top liked comment, "Karma faster than garbage truck. Faster than the garbage truck." That line punched my chest for a second, but not from pain. It was the truth I once told Darren when he was a 6-year-old kid standing on the step rail of my truck. The garbage truck comes early, but karma comes earlier. Now the whole world was saying it back to him. In the yard, Darren completely lost control, flinging the closing document to the ground, shouting, "You can't do this. This is my house." The buyer answered with one single line, simple enough to crush every illusion. "Then why is your name nowhere on the title?" The wind blew through, cold enough that the camera caught the sound of Brianna shivering. She looked up at Darren as if he were a stranger and managed only one broken line. "We really lost it." The two of them stood in the yard like statues melting under acid rain. No house, no belongings, no dignity left. And I sat miles away in a dark cabin, my hand resting on my old reflective vest, realizing that sometimes justice doesn't need a voice, doesn't need me to show up. It only needs a camera and a legal closing to turn arrogance into a neighborhood spectacle. The humiliation happened right on the same concrete where they once mocked my job. And this time, the neighborhood wasn't laughing at me. They were laughing at them. Before he came to the cabin, my phone buzzed nonstop, more than a dozen missed calls, mixed with frantic messages. "Dad, pick up! Dad, don't leave me! Dad, fix this. Please fix this." I watched the screen light up and fade, and like every time before in his life, I didn't answer. Some lessons can't be taught over the phone. You have to let people walk to them. People think their lives get destroyed by a verdict, a document, a stamp. Truth is, most of the time, what ruins them is simply their own decisions, shown under a different light. That night, after the chaos in the yard, I shut the laptop and was about to make tea when my phone vibrated, a notification from Find My. Darren was moving. His little dot slipped out of Whispering Pines, climbing the canyon road toward Walnut Canyon. I stared at the blinking blue dot, not surprised, just feeling something like a storm that had been forecast. Outside, The wind scraped the cabin walls, the smell of pine thickening. About 40 minutes later, headlights cut through the gap in the curtains, dragging a bright slash across the cabin wall. A sudden break. A door slammed. Angry footsteps crushed gravel. I didn't stand. I just reopened the laptop and pulled up a video file I'd saved long ago, the 4-second live stream Brianna thought was a joke. The clip later deleted from TikTok, but downloaded by a neighbor who sent it to me with one line. "Frank, you need to keep this." The pounding on the door came. 3 hits, heavy and urgent. I opened it. Darren stood there, face drained after a day with nowhere left to return to. Eyes bloodshot, hair matted with sweat and wind. He didn't wait for my invitation. He stormed inside, jabbed a finger in my face, and roared, his voice cracking apart. "You ruined my life. Do you understand? You destroyed my life." His scream hit the wood, the glass, and all the empty air between us. Air that had never once been filled with an apology. I shut the door quietly. "I haven't answered yet." He kept going. "Do you know we have nothing? No house, no stuff, no face left with the neighbors? No? Nothing. Why would you do that? Why are you so cruel?" He said cruel without sensing he had taught me the definition with his own hands. I walked past him, sat in the wooden chair by the table, and turned the laptop screen toward us both. "Sit down!" I didn't yell. My voice was low and cold, the kind of cold water in a garbage truck wash bay on a winter morning. He didn't sit. He stood there, panting, chest rising like an animal cornered. I pressed play. The screen lit up. The first sound wasn't me, wasn't him, but Brianna's mocking laugh mixed with her friends. "Old man slapped by his own son, guys. Look at this." Then the shaky camera view. Darren standing there in the same living room he'd just lost, hand raised, face flushed with booze and arrogance. First slap. The smack was so sharp the cabin felt like it hurt it. My face on the screen jerks to one side. Second slap. Third. Laughter, clapping, someone saying, "Hit him again so he wakes up." I stared at Darren, not the screen. By the 5th slap, he glanced at the laptop, his real face turning pale under the cabin's warm light. 12th slap, someone counting out loud, an eye on the screen, still sitting there, hands on the table, eyes down. 20th slap, Brianna clapping loudly, "Record that!" The clip ended. Silence. Only wind brushing the cabin wall and Darren's ragged breathing. He wasn't yelling anymore. He just whispered, Who sent you that?" I closed the file. The screen went black, like the door that closed in his face tonight. I laced my fingers, rested them on the table, looked straight into the panic and anger in his eyes, and for the first time since the night he slapped me, I said the sentence I had held back. "You slapped me 20 times with your hand. I signed 20 lines with a pen. You tell me which one you prefer." He froze like he'd been nailed to the floor. The question wasn't meant to be answered. It was meant to be understood. I went on, my voice steady without a tremor. "That night, you chose your hands. You chose to humiliate me in front of your friends, your wife, and a camera. You chose to turn me, the garbage man who raised you, into entertainment. I chose a pen. I didn't touch you. I didn't need the police. Didn't need to scream. I just signed where the law allowed me to sign. 20 slaps, 20 signatures, each one has a price." Darren swallowed hard, his throat moving like a stone was stuck there. He looked around the cabin as if searching for an exit in 4 wooden walls. "Dad, can you fix it? Can you take the house back? Tell them to cancel the papers. Give us another chance." His voice shrank, tangled, small. I shook my head slowly. "You didn't give me a chance when you raised your hand the 2nd time, the 3rd time, the 20th time. You never stopped to save anything for tomorrow. You chose, and now you're living in what you chose." I turned the laptop back toward myself. I didn't replay it. I didn't need to. The person who needed to see it had seen enough. "I didn't ruin your life, Darren," I said, the final line so soft, that my own voice sounded unfamiliar. I just handed you the picture you drew with your own hands. The truth never left that house. It just took a walk and came back to the right man. I stood and opened the cabin door. The cold rushed in, carrying pine and damp earth. Darren stayed still a few more seconds, then walked past me, stepping down the stairs like someone who'd aged 10 years. I didn't stop him. I didn't say a word. That night, I sat a long time beside the dark laptop, my hand resting on the reflective vest, knowing the conversation wasn't between a poor father and a lost son. It was between two men, one who used his hand to slap, and one who used his pen to sign. And in the end, both had to live with the choices they made. Flagstaff has a strange rule. Bad news never needs a messenger. It finds its own way to exactly the people who need to know. 2 weeks after the night at the cabin, I finally saw the real weight of those 20 slaps. Not on my face, but on the lives of Darren and Brianna themselves. Not because I acted, not because I pushed. Society shifted on its own, and it shifted fast. Darren's company was the first to strike. HR sent him a notice of investigation, the kind of email where the subject line alone tells you your future is closing. The video of the 20 slaps from the live stream leaked into the internal group through someone's hands. Within 48 hours, Darren was suspended. The stated reason was clear: violent conduct in domestic environment. In America, any workplace fears an employee tied to domestic violence. One clip, one caption. I didn't have to say a word. Brianna didn't fare better. The nail salon she worked at lived on Google and Yelp reviews. Just 3 days after the front yard incident, people started flooding them with one-star reviews. 1 star because staff laughed when an elderly man was assaulted. Owner should reconsider the employee named Brianna. Never coming back. Clients canceled. The salon pulled Brianna's picture off their Facebook ads. No one wants to be serviced by someone who once live-streamed her husband humiliating his own father. Then came housing. After losing the house, they tried renting a duplex in the South Side, but the landlord reviewed their background and declined. Reason? Unstable conduct. Viral incident. The clip had spread so far that finding a rental became a luxury. They ended up in an old motel on Route 66, the same type Darren once mocked as for poor labor folks. Ironic how he finally learned what it feels like to sleep on a sagging mattress and listen to trucks roaring all night. Their friends? I don't have to say much. Americans are practical. Touch violence. Lose everything. No one wants the association. The same people who drank beer in Darren's backyard suddenly became busy, traveling, changed numbers, or simply stopped answering. Brianna's friends blocked her outright. Even the one who went to Cancun with her wouldn't dare like her story anymore. They laughed when I was humiliated. Now no one dares to laugh. And Whispering Pines, the neighborhood that whispered about me for years, that looked at me as the old trash man, shifted too. One morning I stopped for coffee. Mr. Hughes stood in line and said quietly enough for only me to hear. Frank didn't say a word, but he got every part right. A younger neighbor behind him added, "Some people demand justice by shouting. You used paperwork and signatures. Cleaner that way." But I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Social justice, when it arrives on time, always carries the smell of silence. A steady silence that needs no justification and no finger-pointing. It simply stands there, letting those who were wrong harvest their own results. No home left. Reputation wiped clean. Friends scattering like they never knew them. Opportunities are closing one door after another. Soft beds are turning into distant luxuries. A future that once seemed easy has suddenly become a steep climb. And me? I didn't avenge. I simply put things back where they belonged. And society has always finished the rest, completing the justice I never had to speak aloud. Early mornings in Flagstaff always have a very particular kind of silence. Not the silence of emptiness, but the silence of things finally arriving exactly where they were meant to be. That day at 4:55 a.m., the temperature outside was only about 5 degrees, a cold mist glazing the familiar green garbage truck. As I walked up, the heat from the exhaust drifted into the air in thick white bursts, like the breath of an old beast more accustomed to winter than people ever are. I opened the cabin door, climbed into the driver's seat, and the vinyl let out a small groan beneath my worn reflective jacket. At exactly 5 o'clock, the new kid at the job came running over, beanie crooked, holding a cup of hot coffee. He looked at me for a second and asked, hesitant, "You okay, Frank?" Not a polite question. His eyes looked at me the way someone looks at a man who has walked through a storm and somehow stayed standing. I adjusted my seatbelt, looked toward the still dim route ahead, and answered slowly, each word clear like the sound of a garbage hopper locking into place. This job taught me one thing. When something is dirty, you clean it. Feelings are the same. The kid stayed quiet for a few seconds, then nodded gently, as if that line explained not just one story, but an entire life. I turned the truck on, the engine humming low and steady. Before pulling out, I did the small thing I've done for 32 years. Hung my reflective jacket neatly on the metal hook beside the seat. A tiny act, but my reminder that whatever belongs to order should be put back into order. Whatever doesn't deserve to stay should be let go. During a short break, I stepped down from the truck and looked toward the North Eldon pines, still swallowed in thin fog. The wind rolled down from the ridge, cold but clean, threading through my sleeves, carrying the scent of fresh pine, the smell I've always tied to peace. For the first time in many years, my chest did not feel heavy, not bitter, not weighted with the shame of a father humiliated. I just felt clean, not because life suddenly grew easier, but because what needed cleaning, I cleaned. What needed to be paid, I paid. What needed releasing, I released. Flagstaff was still cold. The morning route was still long. The garbage truck still moved like every other day. But inside that cold, through the thick morning fog, I understood. Some forms of justice need no shouting, no slammed fists, no proving. They simply need silence, at the right time, in the right place, in the right way. And sometimes that silence is the loudest voice a man can leave behind. If you're still here listening to the very last second, I just want to say one thing. Thank you for giving your time to the story of a father who was pushed to the bottom, then climbed back up with truth and calm. If this story touched something in you, a memory, a wound, or just a nameless feeling, leave a dot so I know you're not walking alone. And if you want to keep walking with me through journeys where dignity is reclaimed with mind and patience, not with shouting, I invite you to hit subscribe so the right stories find you at the moments you need a small light in your darkest days.